and welcome to the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. For those of you watching live, we're a wee bit late today. Many apologies. The internet gremlins have been playing up, but thanks for bearing with us and I hope you enjoy the show. I'm Ruth Watson. My guests today are Fiona Grahame of Orkney News and Huw Marshall of Talking Wales. Hi, guys.
Hello, Borada Clownder.
Hello.
Well, thanks for bearing with us through all the technical issues. I hope that the program will be buzzing despite the internet issues. So we're going to be talking about some of the news affecting Scotland today after this update about the Russian war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia, it's day 508 of the Ukraine war. Ukraine and Russia have accused each other of shelling civilians in a village in Zaporizhia after 3 people were wounded in attacks. The head of Ukraine's presidential administration, Andriy Yermak, said Russian forces bombed the village of Stefanivsk using multiple rocket launchers, hitting an administrative building. Moscow-backed officials claim Kyiv's forces shelled a school in the village of Stulniv. Russia has issued criminal charges against 7 people who planned to kill 2 prominent Russian journalists in an alleged Ukrainian-backed plot, according to the state-owned TASS news agency. Russia's FSB security service detained an unspecified number of people who the SFP claim conducted reconnaissance near the homes and workplaces of journalists Margarita Simonian, head of state media outlet RT, that's Russia Today, and Ksenia Sobchak, who ran against President Vladimir Putin in 2018. The FSB said detainees had admitted preparing attacks on the 2 women on behalf of Ukraine and had been promised a reward of 1.5 million rubles for each one. South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol has pledged to increase his country's humanitarian and non-lethal military assistance to Ukraine after a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. Vladimir Putin has said the main objective of the deal that allowed Ukrainian grain exports to resume was not achieved in a call with his South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa. The Black Sea grain deal that eased fears of a global food crisis sparked by the war in Ukraine is due to expire late on Monday unless Russia agrees to renew it. Ukraine has criticised the Bulgarian president over his remarks that Kyiv is to blame for Russia's ongoing war and that supplying arms to Ukraine only prolongs the conflict. Ukrainians have reacted with bemusement, mild irritation and irony to UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace's comments that the country should be more grateful for the help it is receiving from the UK and other allies as it fights off Russian aggression. A large convoy of at least 60 trucks, buses and other large vehicles carrying fighters from the Wagner private army was spotted entering Belarus from Russia early on Saturday, according to independent monitoring group Belaruski Hadjun. So the first item that we're going to discuss today is the cost of living crisis. I mean, it's just ongoing, isn't it? Every day this week there have been stories about the cost of living crisis, from the failure of energy payments to the two-child policy and the rape clause. But despite this, the Labour seem to be intent on keeping the Tory spending levels in a bid apparently to appease the right-wing press. And what do you make of this, Fiona? And really, what are people to take from not only the situation we find ourselves in, but the position that Labour seems to be adopting?
Well, for ordinary people, they notice it most. They go to the supermarket to do their shopping, and prices have increased. Every week you go, there's things are more expensive. And even things like a tin of baked beans that the Tories are so keen on us all eating. A tin of baked beans has gone up 40% in a year. Basic foodstuffs. And then if people want to cook these actual things, they're using energy. So for very ordinary people on, fixed incomes, uh, low wages, it's just absolutely unending. And the stress, I really worry about the mental health issues that are building up in people, um, because they simply cannot afford heating and eating. And, okay, we're in the summer, but we're going into winter time soon. And it's going to be worse then. And I just see no end to it. Labour have got no answers, for goodness sake. When you're led by wealthy politicians, what do you expect? So I'm really, really worried about, people, the elderly, the vulnerable, people that need medical equipment on the whole time in their homes. These costs, they're just awful. And there's no way out of it in the current system.
I mean, for sure, my bills went from, we got a smart meter fitted, and our bills went from being £3 or £4 a day to, I mean, just like up over £10 in the height of winter, and it's really scary. You think, well, what are we supposed to do? How are you supposed to live like this? And baked beans. I bought baked beans in our local Coopy are over £1 a tin. And I mean, for some of them, you're going, well, what's that? And you're talking about hypothermia. Well, the report the other day was that over 1,200 more Scots were treated for hypothermia during the energy bills crisis. I mean, that's just Dickensian. Now, Huw, what's your take on this from a Welsh perspective?
Yeah, it's incredibly distressing. I think there was the Office of National Statistics. They put out a statistic last week that 1 in 20 adults had reported in the past 2 weeks they had run out of food and had been unable to afford more. This is 2023. We're living in supposedly one of the richest economies in the world, and 1 in 20. It's not a small number. Can't afford food. I don't know. And like I say, the alternatives, from everything we hear from Starmer and Rachel Reeves, it just sounds like, we can't borrow, we can't do this, we can't do anything. We're just going to have to, carry on. And they're going to just blame the Conservatives for the fiscal mess that we're in, which is exactly what the Conservatives did when they came in after Labour the last time. So I don't know what the answer is. And what's interesting is that Starmer's take is at odds with how sort of Labour put themselves forward in Wales. The Welsh Labour Party seem to be an outlier in all of this, in the fact that they do seem to sort of have an opinion about doing things differently. But having said that, this week the Welsh Labour government announced that they won't be extending the free meals during the summer holidays. And when you hear that on the back of the 1 in 20 statistic, and the fact that 1 in 3 children currently live in poverty, it's distressing. And I just, I feel for the people. This, with the summer holidays starting here in Wales in a week, that they're literally, without the free school meals, how are they going to feed their children? It's astonishing.
I mean, I guess the thing is, I was looking at, Alison Thewlis, the SNP MP. I was talking about the two-child limit and the rape clause to be scrapped, following new figures showing that 409,600 households were missing out on vital income due to the rape clause policy, which of course has been backed by the Scottish Conservatives. But Starmer recently confirmed that scrapping the two-child limit party policy, and some of the Labour MSPs seem to have discovered, I don't know whether it's a spine or just they finally just had enough, and they want to speak out regardless of what the ramifications may be for their own sort of place within the party in Scotland. But you've got Monica Lennon, MSP, so Labour MSP. Coming out and speaking quite forcefully against this. So, I mean, at what point do you think the Labour Party in the sort of branch offices, both in Wales and in Scotland, decide that Starmer doesn't represent them? I mean, where do we go when you've got where are people supposed to go? If they're looking at Labour and just seeing sort of Tory light.
I think if
Fiona.
oh, sorry.
Oh no, she seems to have
right.
frozen.
Well,
Huw.
I see none of that. I see none of in Scottish League. I don't see them departing from Starmer's view. And there's something incredibly wrong if it's the norm to have a food bank in your town. I mean, we never ever thought we would see that in Orkney, and they're now essential. And during the summer holidays, they will become even busier, even with play facilities and food provided by other charities and stuff. These are essential, and not just for food now, for energy vouchers, for pet food vouchers, for a whole load of, goodness me, just even for shampoo, basic essentials. Now, that is an absolute disgrace. And Labour in Scotland have no answers to this. They've completely bought into Starmer.
And what do you think? I mean, in Wales, there's I mean, obviously Scotland has got a different political perspective, in terms of sort of the elected representatives that we have. But in Wales, there seems to be quite a strong support for Labour there. And you've got to, I mean, Mark Drakeford, he's a pretty interesting person when you come to politically, sort of his views. He's sort of talks about being a unionist, but that he thinks the union is leaving Wales before Wales is leaving the union. So he sounds like somebody who could kind of be persuaded towards independence, or leaving the United Kingdom. I mean, what is the view that you see developing in Wales, if there's any dissension or change of outlook?
Yeah, like I said, Labour in Wales is a completely different beast to the Labour Party in England and in Scotland, and I think a lot of that comes down to the strength of the SNP in Scotland, and also possibly the lack of strength of Plaid Cymru in Wales. I think in Scotland, what we hear from Labour is SNP bad, that they won't work with them, won't cooperate with them, whereas the SNP and Plaid Cymru are from a policy perspective, are far more to the left than Starmer's Labour. But Labour in Wales, as you said, Drakeford was, he was a Corbyn ally. He comes from that part of the Labour Party, and I think that genuinely that they do want to be progressive, but it's just this weakness that they're wed through the union to to the political system. And unfortunately, Starmer is, he's playing to the gallery. He's playing to the 84% that makes up, the population of England. And Wales and Scotland, collateral damage. They hope that the SNP will have been damaged by Sturgeon's standing down. And obviously in Wales, there's the old adage, you could pin a red rosette on a donkey and people would vote for it. But I think that's changing. I think, well, sadly, you're finding a lot more right-wing politics coming into play in Wales, aligning more with English politics. So that, that left-wing radicalism that Wales is famous for, I think is waning. But what's interesting, you look at young people are far more supportive of independence, they're far more supportive of Plaid Cymru, and you find even young people who would vote Labour are more supportive of independence as well. So I think, it's interesting that there is a movement within the Labour Party in Wales, Labour for Indies, with following them on social media, who are calling for, the Labour Party to have, an independent Wales.
And how significant a sort of tranche of the Welsh Party, Labour Party, do you think that is? I mean, there's if you look online, there's sort of Scottish Tories for Independence Twitter account, and I'm never quite sure if it's a parody account or not because they've never replied to any of my queries. So, but it would be interesting to know if actually there really is how big a section there is.
I think that there is a genuine appetite there, because if you look at the polling, most recent polling has independence in Wales at around, I think it's about 33%, which is, going, when you consider like 15 years ago it was on 8 to 10%, so it is higher, and obviously it's younger people who are pushing that figure up as well. Because if you look at the over 65s, they're the ones who are, sort of vehemently opposed to independence. So there is change afoot, and like I say, there was polling suggesting that over half of Labour voters in Wales would vote for independence. They wouldn't necessarily vote for independence tomorrow, but if the circumstances were right, and the case was made, in a sensible manner, that support would come.
Well, moving on to the next story, which is may help some of that support come sooner than some might anticipate. The Brexit in the room is about to get bigger, with new import controls on goods coming through Europe in October, and the new Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP trade deal, which looks likely to be negatively affecting our farmers. And hitting the potential for food production, in sort of with post-Brexit rising costs and shortage of labour impacting our farming communities. So I mean, the free trade agreement, it's 11 countries around the Pacific Rim, including Canada, Mexico, Peru, New Zealand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and others. Some trade experts say that it's more about building relationships and economic gains, because there really aren't many economic gains when you look at it in detail. But it's not a disaster. So I mean, it could be worse. But it's when you look that the European Union has just declared a very successful trade deal, looks like, with New Zealand, that basically has got sort of foods coming in, but with huge protections for the farmers that the UK government did not negotiate. So I mean, what do you guys have any views about the impact of Brexit in your areas? I mean, Fiona, it's I know that Brexit has hit the fishermen, the shell fishermen in particular, as well as with many of the farming exports. What's your perspective on it?
Well, Orkney voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. It might have wanted still to be part of the UK in 2014, but in 2016, it very much wanted to be part of the European Union still. And on that advisory referendum, we were removed from the world's largest free trade market. And it's not just about shellfish, crabs, farming, it's about the whole infrastructure that we got from the EU. We got piers built. You'll find EU signs on Scarabry Visitor Centre. You'll find them on RSPB sites. And then there's the whole academic side of it, because our young people have been removed from the Erasmus scheme. It's much more than just products and goods. And it's only going to get worse, because the UK has become isolationist. They've put up the borders, and we've got lost all those people that came as well. Yes, we still get visitors to Orkney from Europe, and they absolutely are dead keen on Scotland rejoining the EU. Spoken to them in the street, and they're very supportive, both of an independent Scotland and of Scotland joining the EU. And they're bemused at the situation we found ourselves in.
I mean, there have been conversations recently, some fairly inflammatory headlines about Orkney looking perhaps to become to be voting on whether or not to become a sort of a protectorate, like the Channel Islands, or sort of develop closer ties with Norway. I mean, having lived in Orkney for a number of years, and knowing or being aware of some of the characters involved, I'm fairly sure that's one of those not quite tongue in cheek, but not entirely serious conversations. But do you think that there's any, I mean, there's often talk that perhaps an independent Scotland would do well to have a more federalised structure that give the islands more autonomy, as you see, for example, with Faroe and Iceland. Not Iceland. Pardon me, total brain fog moment there. But do you see that there is scope, perhaps, that Brexit might make people think differently about Orkney's place in the European and Scots Island structure?
Well, on June the 30th, COSLA, which includes Orkney, signed with the Scottish Government the Verity House Agreement. And that was all about devolving power to local authorities. It was all about giving them more flexibility over their budgets. It's a really, really important document. And then days later, our leader of our council here, who actually himself physically signed that document, reneged on all of that and went to the council with his motion about investigating, Orkney separating from Scotland, from the UK. There wasn't even anything, by the way, on the side of a bus about this. There's absolutely no policy. So with no mandate at all, the councillors voted to investigate this. So with an idea about the cost this is going to be, or what implications it would have. But all the options that are put forward, Orkney would still be outside the EU, and it's the one place it actually wanted to be. So I know you said it might not be serious, but it actually is serious, because this has huge financial implications for the people of Orkney, because the councillors are spending money on it instead of maintaining the Verity House Agreement, the whole idea of cooperation and working together with the Scottish Government on devolving more powers locally and having flexibility over their budgets.
So what's the sort of political reasoning and thinking behind that? I mean, is it mischief making of the sort of Carmichael Lib Dem kind of model, just to try and muddy the waters a bit, and sort of try and stop conversations
No, I don't
perhaps
think
about
it's
Scottish
anything to do with
independence, or?
them. No, it's nothing to do with them. It's one man's vision. And he went to the electorate with it at the last Scottish election, and, what, 1,000 or so people agreed with them. So now he's come again with it, and he's got on breakfast time and whatever, worldwide telly with this idea that's just popped out of absolutely nowhere, with no idea about how it would be achieved or what it would cost. There's no white paper or little blue book on this. It's just, it's populism 101.
Well, it's just, we seem to be seeing quite a lot of it in the world, don't we? I mean, it's what's your take on the trade deals and their place within? I mean, how that's affecting our local economy, Huw? I mean, in Wales, is there much concern, or is there much awareness about the ongoing impact? Because Brexit still hasn't fully been felt yet. I mean, that's still, October is going to bring a whole new wave of potential shortages and trouble with the different regulations coming in, and this trade partnership, this agreement, seems to be somewhat of a sticking plaster to try and make the gaping wound look better.
Yeah, obviously from a Welsh perspective, it's a stick we're beaten with, continually, that we did vote, although by a small majority, 80,000 for Brexit. But I think, again, if you ask people now, now that they actually know, the facts, then I think that result would be very different. But that was the vote, and we have to live with that. But I think what's raised awareness here, especially as the deal with New Zealand, is obviously one of the agriculture is one of the key parts of the Welsh economy. Not just from an employment point of view, it's important. It's important from a cultural point of view, because obviously the Welsh language is very strong within the agricultural communities. But we've got almost 10 million sheep in Wales. So every year, almost, I don't know, a couple of million lambs are born, and then obviously processed and sold on. But a lot of that lamb was for the export market. Of course, with the New Zealand deal, they was sort of rubbing their hands together, because it's they're in a position now to be able to undercut Welsh lamb, because obviously they freeze it, and then they bring it over in ships. So that has made people aware of what's going on. And like I say, this the trade deal talk about now, it's again, it's the elephant in the room. The fact that we've cut ourselves off from just a major trading sort of block on our doorstep, and trying to make out that having a deal with that'll take in places like Singapore or whatever is going to be beneficial. It's just pie in the sky. But yeah, no, again, it's another aspect that's worrying. Again, you got an opposition who will likely be in power following the next election, who seem to think, yes, we don't want to upset the people in the red wall who voted, for Brexit purely on the basis of immigration, one issue, that they're not willing to even discuss. That as a situation. It's just, again, it's just so much of what's going on, in Wales, Scotland, and and the UK. It's just depressing.
Well, but for to depress you somewhat further, I mean, we'll move on to discuss climate change and the climate emergency, because there's a huge issue involved in, for shipping food, getting onions from New Zealand shipped halfway across the world while we're experiencing a climate emergency, and also therefore undermining our own farming base and the sustainability of our abilities to keep on feeding ourselves, and of course cutting out our neighbours, who, I mean, that's one of the things. If because we're no longer in the EU, as food shortages hit. I mean, so for example, India has just announced that their tomato crop has failed. So they may not be exporting rice, or maybe limiting exports of rice. And the EU is experiencing its own significant issues with flooding and terrifying heat waves. And so the food that they produce, if that gets reduced, obviously they only export when they have a surplus, and we're no longer within the EU, so that surplus may not be coming our way. So, when we're looking at climate change, it's front and center. We're looking at extraordinary heats across Europe. I was seeing last night that the North Atlantic drift, that current now is broken, and it looks like the South Atlantic equivalent is going the same way. So, I mean, what do you guys think when you're having conversations with people about what it is, the policies that need to be brought into place? And I mean, I know Orkney. I actually was at one of the first wind farms on Evie when it was put in, the first wind farm in Orkney. I went to its opening many years ago, and everyone thought, "Oh, that's quite quirky, isn't it? It's going to be quite interesting to see how this works." And now we've got these it is the future of power for many people. But Orkney and Shetland, you've got your beautiful countryside covered in wind farms, and suffer high electricity prices as you watch that electricity being exported. So I mean, what do people think about the ways in which we address the climate emergency, and what impact are people actually talking about it more realistically now as being something that is here and now and has arrived? Fiona?
Well, no, we're not addressing it. Governments are not addressing it. People in the street, you'll say, "Oh, it's such a lovely warm day." They're not really thinking that June was the hottest on record ever, since records began across the UK. The people who notice it first are actually farmers, gardeners, people who work the land, people who work with wildlife. So they're seeing changes in bird populations and things like that. So those are the people who see it, straight away. But members of the public, most of them, they're just not realizing it, and politicians respond to what the public are saying, or seem to be saying. And, we're not really doing anything about it. There's pretendy things, if you like. And yes, we need renewable energy, but I was reading a very disturbing report about the production of lithium the other day. And so, let's be careful that we don't leap into another disaster by exploiting another country's resources and mining and polluting areas just to extract lithium for electric battery powered vehicles and such. Um, so, what were the global climate change targets all for if countries are just going to ignore them, which they are doing? And yet we do little things in our own backyard, if you like. And yes, little things are important, but this does need stuff done global to sort. Well, we can't sort it, but we can kind of mitigate some of the effects.
What do you what's your take on it, Huw? I mean, the EU passed the nature restoration law last week, and there's some really interesting aspects to that. I mean, it's I think one of the important things, obviously, is for those people who are being asked to make the changes at the front of industry, whether that be farmers or small businesses, are sort of given support and clarity to be able to sort of move their way through those transitions. But I mean, there was one thing that caught my eye, which was that if you're somebody was, for example, bringing in soy or soya products, that it had to be certified as coming from a farm that it had not, this has not caused the destruction of trees or forests for the production. So, I mean, on the face of it, this is a really progressive piece of legislation.
Yeah, and again, in Wales, the Labour government, and as part of the cooperation agreement with Plaid Cymru, are doing things, practical things that are actually happening. So in October last year, the Minister for Climate Change, Julie James, announced that they were setting up a publicly owned renewable energy developer. So, that's something practical. But again, it's at odds with, Keir Starmer, who I'm sure coincidentally came up to Scotland to announce GB Energy or whatever. He was sort of advocating. And also, big in the news at the moment in Wales is plans. Well, they're going to be coming in the next sort of 2 months, reducing speed limits in certain areas from 30 to 20 miles per hour, which again is part of, is the climate change initiative is a big, as well as, a safety. So, they're taking unpopular moves. They're looking at, tree planting. They're at odds with a lot of the sort of farming community because obviously, the support for rewilding in order to sort of, capture carbon dioxide by planting more trees and, and returning sort of mountains from being grazed by the 9 million odd sheep. So yeah, no, it's causing conflicts, but they are, they're taking steps that are unpopular with lots of the public, and it's so sad because we know that that it's an issue, but but when you get people, I don't know, like people like Julia Hartley Brewer saying that it's raining in the Cotswolds, therefore there is no global warming, and it's sad that social media platforms, especially things like Twitter under Elon Musk, are just allowing this nonsense to be to be spread, because there is a genuine crisis, and I worry for my children about the world they live in. I was thinking, there's a butterfly survey being carried out across the UK soon. I'm 54 now. I remember as a child, living, in the countryside in the north of Wales, walking through fields, and I could count, I lost count of the amount of not just butterflies, but the species of butterflies. And now, if I see one red admiral, or or a cabbage white, it's a cause for celebration, because they're so few and far between. And I live somewhere where it is unspoilt, where we've got 13 acres around our property, which isn't sort of farmed. It is left to wildlife. So if the situation is like that here, God knows what it's like in other parts of the country.
Yeah, it's when you look at the conversations being had. I mean, the other day there was a conversation between George Monbiot, who's a sort of uber regenerationist and doesn't really seem to see a place for humanity on the planet, because he doesn't seem to want anybody to be fed. I'm not quite sure where he thinks food's going to come from. And somebody like Alan Savory, who's got some really interesting very interesting perspectives about the way in which we regenerate soil health. And so it's sort of two different kinds of regeneration outlets, but Savory's model is very much sort of based on savannas and prairies, rather than looking at countries like Scotland or Wales. And oh god, sorry, my cats are fighting outside. So sorry. So you've got these policymakers, and I kind of wonder at what point in the middle of it all we get conversations happening about the realities of the way in which people are able to farm. So, for example, having more meadows and sort of like putting the right trees in the right places, rather than just sort of like handing it over to Danes, rich Danes, for sort of experimenting. But the voice in my ear is telling me to move on. So moving on to the Scottish Green Industrial Strategy, which really sort of follows on from this. I mean, when we're looking at sort of the first, it was Ian Blackford introducing the first threads of a strategic staircase for growth in value added and productivity, as Hamza Youssef calls for a receptive industry in the Scottish government. I mean, there's SSEN, for example, is bringing on this massive, the sort of South of Scotland electricity network, is proposing this massive network of pylons to bring the sort of the sea green wind farm energy onto Scotland, and some of it will go to Scots homes, but the majority of it is for export to England and to France. And they're proposing putting these pylons, which are about 5 times the size of any pylon you've ever seen before, sort of right across sort of the central spine of Scotland, rather than sort of burying it to whatever other sort of technologies they could do. There's going to be a subsea section from Orkney down. But yeah, I mean, as Fiona alluded to earlier, I mean, are we at risk of having sort of going from the frying pan to the fire as we look for solutions, but that aren't actually holistic? I mean, Fiona, what's the viewpoint? What's the viewpoint from Orkney on this?
Well, I've read the report that Ian Blackford commissioned, and it's good to involve universities and research institutions in developing any kind of strategy. But alarm bells rang in my little old brain there, with phrases like quest for growth in it. Um, and, again, it's another one of these top down reports, and it does refer to local ecosystems. I think there's like about 2 references to that. But the whole, like team is proposing that develop this strategy with the Scottish government. It's all very, top down people. So we're going the wrong way about developing any kind of solutions. Yes, we have to have an overarching national and global policy and strategy on the whole thing. but it needs to come from the bottom up. So it needs to be localised. So we look at all the local schemes we've got in Orkney. You referred to that first one on Edie, but there's a whole load of other things we could have actually. A local energy network in Orkney, providing for the people of Orkney instead of it all exporting. That would go a great way to alleviating fuel poverty and poverty itself. Um, so yeah, that report commissioned by Ian Blackford, um, there are those phrases in it that definitely concern me, because again, it's more about the whole financial side of it, and not a citizen side of it.
Is the whole question also about the way in which, I mean, as you allude to, who benefits from this, and I mean, there's a lot of anger in, sort of in Angus and the Mearns, about this immense pile. I mean, it's not just a little bit. The Danes won't even have them in their country, so it's far less putting them right across the country. They won't even allow one in the country. Um, and there's this real sense that yet again this is Scotland's resources being exploited, and it's going to be other nations or other investors, private investors, that reap the benefits rather than the people of Scotland who are being inconvenienced by all of this. I mean, are there parallels or good examples happening in Wales, Huw?
Yeah, again, it's one of the two of the main arguments that a lot of people use, in support of independence in Wales, are the fact that we've got the potential for energy regeneration, because obviously we've got a huge coastline, we've got large offshore wind farms. At the moment, we've got inshore wind farms across. Where I live, at the top of the valley, I can see 5 large windmills. But like I say, we're not seeing the benefits of those here. And the other, obviously they're looking now at developing a huge floating wind farm. There's a spot off the south west of Wales, which is apparently perfect for that kind of development. But obviously, any profits or any revenues from that will go to the Crown Estate, because unlike Scotland, in Wales, the Crown Estate isn't devolved. So, there's huge potential, but again, we're not seeing the benefits of it. Like I say, and I think the fact is that people are paying more for electricity in rural communities because of the connectivity issue. Obviously, because it costs more to get electricity to remote areas because of the infrastructure costs. But as you say, that's the frustrating thing is, that they're putting infrastructure into rural communities to generate it, but that's not being passed on. And I think, we need to do far more around sort of local energy regeneration, and think more out of the box. Where I live, we've got a river that flows down through the valley, that has the potential to have, small hydro schemes, even if it just, heats the local leisure centre or the local swimming pool. All these things, like I say, it's all these little things can have a much bigger impact. And I'm still amazed at how many new sort of buildings built by local authorities and by government don't have solar panels on the roof. It's crazy in this day and age. So there's a lot of obvious solutions out there, and they're not being followed up. But in Wales there is sort of a growth of local energy generation, but it's very patchy, and it's not. That's why I think having this new Welsh-owned, green energy generator, could potentially act as a catalyst for that.
Well, that's a potential ahead anyway, but for sure, when 1/3 of Pakistan disappeared under floodwaters last year, you know, it is called the climate emergency for a reason. So I guess we need to come up with something, and come up with something fast. But like Fiona's alluded to, one that doesn't destroy the planet further. So I mean, looking at the media, and it just very briefly, because there's been lots said about it. But in the Murdoch press launching an attack on the BBC being yet again unwieldy and uncertain in how to approach it. I mean, obviously, sort of being very careful in what's said, because there's a remarkable potential for libel laws kicking in if we get this wrong. So just a quick word. I mean, there's a certain hypocrisy about the Murdoch press, which for many, many, many decades made its money on naked women on page 3, sort of decrying what appears to be pretty creepy text messages or private messages, and allegations of money being exchanged between an older an influential BBC presenter, as it's alleged, and a young person. But do we? I mean, at what point do people wake up and realize that sort of the tabloid way of dealing with these things is just grim? And at what point do you think the BBC has been so hamstrung and is now so uncertain by the sort of the sort of the I would say the Conservative Party is sort of, hanging the sword of Damocles over its head, that it just doesn't know how to respond to anything anymore? I mean, Huw, have you got any views on that? But again, briefly.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for me is the fact that it shows that the tabloid media is allowed to lead the news agenda, and that's the thing that concerns me. Is why is something that the Sun is reporting is front and center of what's going on. There's a climate emergency. Genuine issues. There are so many things in the world at the moment that need dealing with and need discussing, and yet it's this kind of story that they're pushing out. I was looking at web statistics. If you look at the Sun's website, they doubled traffic to their website, during bringing that story out. And what that means is they're generating more revenues, because obviously more people visit their website, the more money they get from advertising. So it's a cynical ploy. News now is just a business. It's a business of driving people to websites to look at adverts. That's what it is. It's not about reporting the news and being objective and providing public interest journalism. And it's really depressing. But the fact that the BBC allowed this agenda, and they don't help themselves. They still have newspaper reviews. Newspapers now, they're not unbiased, sort of, pieces of work that report, what's going on in the world. That they're mouthpieces for owners, with a particular political bent, and they're allowing this to continue. It's awful.
I mean, Fiona, for my former employer, back in the day, the BBC, when you brought out a news report, you made sure that it was balanced, and you made sure that it was fact checked, and you made sure that you told the truth and gave people full context to make their views up. And call me a sentimentalist, but I kind of miss that kind of reporting. I mean, when we look at, for example, the Martin Compston story sort of being sold in BBC Scotland as Humza Yousaf helping a crony to get a COVID vaccine, and then you sort of go down about sort of on their online version, go down to about sort of the last paragraph, and it turns out that Martin Compton was just asking how he would go about getting the vaccine in the legitimate way, because they were now open, and because he was away, he didn't know how to get it, and he was coming to Scotland. So it actually was quite a legitimate approach, but that was not the impression that you would have seen. And the BBC in Scotland has had to apologise 2 or 3 times for misleading headlines and stories about the SNP, even in the last few weeks. Now, obviously Broadcasting Scotland isn't a pro-SNP mouthpiece, but in terms of reporting Scottish politics fairly and accurately, how concerned are you that we have a hill to climb to get people used to looking for the truth in journalism again?
Well, the truth is out there, because there's plenty of independent news outlets now and can use them. But I'm with the people of Liverpool on the whole Sun question, and you never share and repost anything from the Sun, because, as Huw says, that's just clickbait, and that's what it all is, and that includes the stories the BBC have been running as well on Martin Compston. And it's clickbait, and it's all about generating advertising revenue, not actually reporting news fairly and squarely, or sharing actual real stories, climate emergency or whatever. So, be like the people of Liverpool. Have nothing to do with the sun and don't go posting it on your social media. And, be like me and don't have a TV license and don't watch the BBC. And you'll find your whole world will open up, because there's a whole load of independent media out there that are really good and very interesting to read and to watch.
Yes, I like those that make sure that sources are clear, because I think that if we can get people used to looking for sourced information, that's we start getting onto a bit more of a winner. Now, very briefly, Scotland celebrated the life of Winnie Ewing yesterday, Madame Écosse, in Inverness yesterday, and I suspect that very few of us would be sitting here talking about Scotland and Scotland's future as an independent nation if it was not for Winnie Ewing and the legacy that she left behind. Very briefly, because we are running out of time, Fiona, what were your views on the the memorial for Winnie Ewing, but also actually the lack of coverage? Really, I didn't really see very much about it, and she was a national figure who had an international sort of standing as well. What's your view on her legacy and the way that she will be remembered?
Well, you'll find the memorial service on Inverness Cathedral's YouTube channel, and 35 minutes in it starts, and it's very much worthwhile watching, even to her granddaughter singing Dark Island. It's absolutely beautiful. And if you want to know about Winnie Ewing and you don't, watch that, because it's certainly a wonderful memorial service. And, the family should be very, very proud of having both a mother and grandmother like her.
Huw, do many people in Wales know about Winnie Ewing and the legacy she left behind?
Yeah. Yes, and the coverage. There was, there has been coverage. And I was aware of the memorial service going on. But I'm just remembering, as a child growing up in Wales in the 70s, being aware of Winnie Ewing, and the SNP. So she was somebody who did, sort of reach beyond, the borders of Scotland, most certainly. And she was an innovator, and she's a huge loss to Scotland and the rest of the of the independence community as well.
Well, we look forward to seeing her legacy, perhaps brought to fruition in the near future. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or we do take one-off donations too. Right now, we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay the bills and keep the studio going, to ensure that we can continue making programmes. We have raised over £9,000 so far, but we really do need to raise the remaining 21,000 as soon as possible. The cost of living crisis is hitting everywhere, and if you ever got a chance to come and see the studios, they're pretty amazing and just being done on a shoestring budget and run by volunteers. With extra money, we could be even hiring more people and developing a future broadcaster for Scotland that's very professional and is able to get good internet so we get our programmes out on time. Thank you very much again to our guests, Fiona, Grahame and Huw Marshall. I'm Ruth Watson. Thank you very much. Goodbye and thanks for watching.